next another episode of Content for Devs. Oh, again, welcome in another episode of Content for Devs podcast. Today we have amazing guest Brett Chalupa, who joins us from Pennsylvania. And today we are planning to talk about game development and the content creation around it a little bit. But before we start, Brett, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Brett. I live in Pennsylvania in the US, and my background is primarily building web applications and APIs with Ruby on Rails. So I've been a Rubyist for about 12 years now, and that's my day job. But throughout my life, I've pursued game development to varying degrees. And about 6 months ago, when my first child was born, I really decided that I want to pursue game development with all due seriousness. So I just reached the 6 month mark last weekend, actually, and have been trying to really, with laser focus, pursue that in my limited free time. Having a baby and a day job and a family and all that stuff. It's my free time's limited, but I have tried to take what I've learned throughout my career building software and apply that to game development. And from things like how I approach writing code and the tools I use to marketing and thinking about things in terms of, what does a modern solo game developer look like? And how does one break into that industry and find a sort of success? And so, yeah, that's where I'm at. I'd say I'm a seasoned developer, but sort of fresh in game development. And that journey has been really interesting and really fun. I've learned a lot already. I've got sort of big ideas and different ideas that I'm excited to explore and keep seeing how they go.
Awesome to hear. And there are already, I see a few topics that I will want to ask you about during the talk. But before we start, let's um, summarize our last week or like few weeks, maybe even. And Fede, what's on your plate recently? How is your health and the mood in general? And yeah, how was your last week?
Um, yeah, lately my last few weeks were very empty in terms of development. I took some time off, and I'm going for about a month without any major programming work. I'm just working on weekends for a few hours with a friend um, on one project just to get some money on the side. But yeah, this is something I haven't talked about on the podcast, but I thought I talked with you. I'm having some health issues. I'm dealing with that. So I'm trying to focus a bit on that. Um, I'm trying to come back to the scene. I'm about to start what do you call it? A treatment, which will take some time to be in the hospital and things like that. So I'm trying to use that time if I can, just not to let my mind go away in a bad way. So yeah, that's basically me. I'm off everything right now. That's
Okay,
it. Trying to
awesome.
enjoy life.
Thanks for sharing. Everything. Everybody has like ups and downs,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's also important to remember that because when in this field of content creation, you only have the output present to the web, and especially if you have like a lot of articles in the queue that are automatically published if you are out on holidays or you are sick, and people just completely do not know that we are still normal people.
Yep.
And Brett, what's on your side?
Yeah, so I recently finished the first season of a screencast series called Growing with Godot. Godot is a 2D and 3D game engine. It's open source and just recently released version 4 after many years of development. And as I've been learning Godot, I thought, and this is this sort of overarching mindset I have with everything, is as I'm learning it, I want to share what I'm learning, because anytime I come to something new, there's hundreds of questions about how do I do these things, and I have to cobble together resources to figure those out. So my sort of vision for my creative output is to take what I learn, share it in my way, in a way that's hopefully understandable or a different take or my perspective. And so that was Growing with Godot season 1, which ended up being, it's about 29 videos. They vary in length from 5 to 10 to 15 minutes. And the season finale is a 3.5 hour from scratch tutorial on building a retro 2D pixel art platformer in Godot 4 that you can then publish on the web, and people can use it as like a launching point to make full games themselves. So I finished Growing with Godot season 1, and I'm approaching things in a season sort of approach instead of saying I'm always going to release videos on this schedule, because I find that to be really exhausting. I really respect people who for years stick to a schedule. I'm not so good at it. So I thought, what if I approach things like seasons, like a television show? So, okay, my current project, Growing with Godot season 1, finish that, then I'll work on some game projects, and then I'll come back and do a season 2 and release them sort of in batches over time. So I finished that, and then I've been working on actually learning a slightly different game programming tool called Pixel, Pyxel. It's a Python game programming environment that's like extremely limited. There's a limited number of colors, and it's all 2D, and it has a really simple API. And it's great for rapid prototyping. It's most similar to Pico 8, which is a Lua-based closed source fantasy console that is quite popular. So Pixel is this other fantasy console that's made in Rust with Python bindings. So it's really great. And I've been making small little shoot 'em up games, which I just really am fascinated with. So I'm working on uh, a game in that, which then everything I'm learning will then translate. I'll make resources for it, and it's a good way to experiment with ideas without having to worry about like making full resolution graphics and high definition audio, and like producing a full large polished game is a gargantuan effort. So if you can go and say, here are all these limitations, I just want to focus on the design of the game, how the game plays and feels, I find that to be really helpful. So that's what I've been working on the last week, is this little shoot 'em up called DeSet, which is short for Deep Space Exploration Team, and that'll just be a little small space shooter game.
That's amazing, and it's very useful to have a tool that allows you to compose very simple and quick games. For me as a parent, I'm extremely interested with this, because I would love to just produce a snake game with my kids and just have a fun of playing with it later, or some Tetris, like, or other retro games that I was fan of. So yeah, I will definitely reach out to you later about like specific tools and like what the easiest to learn as for me as a Ruby developer, because definitely I plan to do it this or next year with my kids. So yeah, pretty excited. Awesome. On my side, I got back to schedule after also health issues, not mine actually. My family was sick for pretty heavy, and that put me off of the online like forever. But now I'm back and trying to catch up and not get out from the market, and already have 2 Hanami Mastery episodes to be published this week. So pretty excited that we with the team managed to do it. Things are looking great. The some no, the spring in Poland already began, and there is more sun. Everyone is feeling better. So the last week is pretty positive here in Poland. So best regards to everyone. And without further ado, let's start with the actual topic of the show. So I have few questions, and I reach out to you first, not because you are a game developer, but because you are a game developer and you are producing content in the meantime. And I recently learned that you also are a parent and you had a full-time job. And yeah, whoa, there is a lot to ask about, like how you are not going crazy and why you are doing all of that. So you already mentioned that the full focus on game development is kind of recent thing for you, right? And previously you worked mostly as like a hobby type of game developer, right? So you had, correct me if I'm wrong, but it means that you was a web developer full time and you just produced some games aside and some blogging, video making aside, right? Is that correct? Oh, we don't hear you. We don't hear you, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Yep, I'm still a web developer full time, and I would say over the last, and maybe it helps to start with a little bit more background so that it doesn't seem totally out of left field. But so when I was in high school, when I was 15 years old, um, my high school had a computer science class where we learned Java. And my teacher made us print out our code on paper, and he reviewed all the paper code by hand, and then he compiled it on the computer. So I think he just preferred reading on and grading on paper. So I started programming around that time, 14, 15, with Java and HTML and CSS. And then I got really interested in game programming, and back at that time was when the Xbox 360 came out, which is by Microsoft, and it was a pretty popular console. But something that was really special about it, especially at that time, was that you could code games on Windows for Xbox 360 using this program, and not a program in the computer sense, but a program in the organizing sense. This program called XNA, which was a framework for Xbox. And so then when I was like 16, I started doing that, and that's all C sharp. And you could make games and run them on your Xbox, which was amazing at the time. Now, and that's still not really the case with consoles these days, but I'm sort of less interested in that anyway. But at the time, that was really special. So then I went to college for 3 semesters for game programming and worked with a bunch of different languages. But then I started doing Ruby on Rails and Ruby programming as like an intern, sort of like an apprentice program. And that was going really well, and I loved it. So I left college and higher education. I just started working. So I was like going down this game development path, and then sort of I fell in love with Ruby. I organized a Ruby conference for 3 years in Vermont in the US, and just had a really loved Ruby. I still love working with Ruby, and used that and was able to have a career for the last 10 years programming with Ruby, building web applications and websites and APIs. And then during that time, I would still have this, like, every year or so, I'd go, I really want to make games. I want to go back to what initially inspired me and had me excited about programming. So I would dabble with games, right? I would like read a book, I'd follow tutorials, I'd make small little games, and then I'd get really excited and I'd say, great, I'm going to build an RPG that's like as good as Final Fantasy. And then I work on it for like 2-3 months and then sort of be crushed by the scope of how big and complicated that is, right? As a person working on my own time, as an individual, it's really difficult to take on large, complex projects by yourself. So I'd kind of start and keep failing, start and keep failing. And then when my baby was born, this thought of like people say, oh yeah, it really changes you when your family's born, and or when you have a child and that stuff, and it does, and it makes you think outside of yourself. But for me, the thing was that I kept thinking about is like, as my baby grows up, I want to have them be able to pursue what they're interested in and what they're passionate about, and I want that to be reflected. Like, I want to take those actions, right? Like, I don't want to be the parent who's sort of like, you can follow your dreams and pursue your passions, but I'm going to go and, just kind of, I have a job that I have, and it's not my dream, right? So like, if I want to encourage my children to pursue their dreams, I should be pursuing my dream too, and sort of leading by example. So that was the genesis of this. So then I'm sort of thinking to myself, like, what is my dream that I want to pursue? And it just goes back to making games. And the reason why is because they're technical. So you have the programming challenges. They're artistic, which is really important to me. I love drawing and making music and telling stories and writing. There's interactivity with them. They're just a really interesting form of entertainment and art and media. And to me, that's like, it's just amazing, right? It kind of encompasses all these things that I really care about. Where like building web applications, while interesting, doesn't really encompass much creativity. So with that being said, I go and look internally and talk with my wife and sort of go, okay, well, what does it look like to go from today working as a web application developer? How can I, in the next 5, 10, 20 years, pursue that dream and make it a reality? And so I just took that and broke it down into a bunch of steps, and took what I've learned from my day job and from my past attempts at creativity, and sort of said, okay, let's, treat this hobby a little more seriously while still having all these obligations. And so that's where I'm at now, is, 6 months into taking it seriously with a strategy, creating content surrounding it, and sort of trying to give it my all. Because something that you'll see, like, games take a long time to make, and you'll see this, it's really common, right? Is like, someone will go, they'll spend 2-3 years on a game, and it's very difficult because it can be lonely, it can be challenging. You want to make a game that's the scope and the scale of a game that maybe 10 people made or dozens of people made, and you want to do it by yourself. And that's really difficult. I don't want to fall into that trap of basically radio silence, and then I come out at the end with a game that's finished. I want to work in really small chunks where I can finish projects and be helping and sharing along the way. And the output of what I make is not just finished games, but it's all of these resources of what I'm learning as I go. And I'm hoping that over the next 5 years or so, that what'll happen is I'll be able to sort of make fans. I can't think of a better term than fan, but like, maybe audience, maybe make fans is just by helping people, right? Like, if I make video tutorials, or I write books, or I make zines, or whatever it is I make, and share what I'm learning, other people can learn from that. And if I make games and release them that are free and open source and cross-platform and easily accessible, like, will people just be interested in what I'm making enough to follow along and support me? And that's sort of my theory, or that's my thesis, right? Like, is, can I make interesting, open, transparent games, art, and resources, and get supported while doing it? And I don't know, it's sort of an experiment, and I'm treating it as an experiment, but we'll see how it goes.
Awesome. But you covered, like, you touched so many threads that, it's hard. I should make a notes to be able to ask about everything that I wanted to. But you mentioned that creating big project, especially in the game developer, it's summary of a lot of different activities, like storytelling, directing, graphic design, animations, like beat mapping, all this, like, also this geometry, and coding as well, but different kind of coding, because this is a lot of thread safety and concurrency problems. Man, and you are doing it uh, in the afternoons. But so this is already quite a lot. And if you will add content creation on top of that, won't this just slow you down like crazy?
Yeah, so I've thought about that a lot, right? Is the time that I spend making resources and content, is that time that would be better spent being better as a game developer, right? Like if I spend 10 hours over the course of a month making YouTube videos on how to program audio in Godot or whatever, right? Would that 10 hours be better spent becoming a better game developer? And here's my perspective on that, because I think about that a lot. And before getting into game development over these last 6 months and taking it seriously, I drew some comics, I wrote some short stories, and they're freely accessible and available online. But this thing happens and maybe you could say those aren't very good, which might be true. But this thing I noticed is that when you create something and put it out in the world, regardless of what it is, whether it's a podcast or a video or a game or a comic or a short story, it's really hard to get people to care because so many people are making content. And I don't think it's that the good stuff rises to the top necessarily. I think it's just hard to reach people. And then when you make something and put it out there and all you get back is not much interest, it doesn't feel good, right? So how I view the making of content, I view it as marketing. And I read somewhere, like I forget who said it, but it was this game developer was saying like, you want to spend about 40% of your time on marketing. And most game developers are spending 99% of their time on game development, 1% on marketing. They release their game and then no one really cares or knows about it, right? Because they haven't been getting the word out. And I don't know if I spend 40% of my time on marketing, but I spend an intentional amount of time on it. And I view this sort of content creation as marketing. And I think marketing is different now than it ever was, right? Like I'm not going to go and I don't have the money to run ads on Reddit or YouTube, right? Like running ad campaigns is not really that interesting. I don't click on ads. I don't find that to be useful. What I think about as marketing and content is what I call like the creator theory. So when I look at the things I love most, when I look at the authors, the bands, the game developers, the podcasters that I truly care about the most, follow for years and years and years, support on Patreon, will just immediately buy whatever they make because I care about them as a person, regardless of whether this work is better than that work. It's because I care about that person. And at the center of all of content creation is people. And my theory is that if you put the person first and share and make things, people will be interested because we connect with other humans. And maybe not everyone will be interested in everything I make, but I know that my friends and the creators I follow, I'm just interested in them and I want to support them. So that's sort of my theory, is that marketing isn't about funnels and advertisements, and maybe it is for corporations, right? But for just a single person who wants to make games, I think that making content regularly and having a pulse and helping people, right? Because really what content is for certain perspectives, sometimes it's entertaining, but a lot of times it's based around helping people and sharing what I'm learning. So one is I view it as marketing, and I think that makes it valuable and has been successful over the last 6 months for me. And second is that because I'm sharing what I'm learning, whether I'm making screencasts or talking about game design or writing books on game programming or whatever, is that it really requires me, and I bet you know this from making Hanami screencasts, is that you really have to know what you're talking about to make a video about it, right? If you just vaguely understand something, you might be able to code it, right? You can find it on Stack Overflow or whatever, and paste it in, and it might work. But in order to teach something and explain it, you have to really know it. So a byproduct of making this content where I'm sharing what I'm learning is that I have to learn it really well. And then my sort of theory there is that it helps increase my productivity because I am very well versed in what I'm teaching or sharing or creating. So um, while maybe it does take time to make the content, my theory is that over the long run, it will help me build an audience and maintain an audience that's interested in what I'm making and interested in supporting me because I've helped them. Um, and because of that, I know really well what I'm sharing. So then when I have to actually make the games and produce produce certain types of media, it goes easier. That's the theory, at least. And so far, it's been working pretty well, I think.
Awesome. Great insights. And I it totally resonates with me. So about the Hanami Mastery podcasts, screencasts, it's a lot of similar concepts. When I started that, there were no much resources or any resources like focused on Hanami too, and I wanted to be a change that I wanted to see in the world. In it already saves a lot of time to me because I have a collection of articles and videos that I can point people to. So if in my company my teammate asks about some concept, I say, yeah, when I have time or I can explain, I just explain. But if I have the article already about the whole topic, which is deep dive, and like with resources, with a lot of explanation, a lot of work already had been put. I just can send the video link, and that's all. So over time, it definitely reduces the time you need to spend to educate other people. And yeah, totally agree that when preparing article or video, understanding the topic is like 10 times better than if you just make things working. And but that also enables like lots of doors that you would never be able to open without it. Like for example, I have the access to the core team that they would not even know that I'm existing if I would not have the blog, right? So similar for you, like yeah, you are extremely active in the game development community, and yeah, I had a lot of fun with your destroy all goblins game, and still trying to solve it, like win it. I'm wondering how much levels you have
Sorry,
actually on this.
before you continue with that, I want to add just one bit that I think it's important, and you didn't say. Explaining something to someone else in any way, either via podcast, screencast, stream, or whatever, um, beyond having to study for it to for you to know it. Whenever I have to explain something out loud to someone else, even if it's ad hoc, you ask me, "Hey, how you do this?" and I have to explain it. That helps me understand it better. So outputting any kind of content out there also helps you learn more. So I really wanted to point that out because it's something I think it's important.
I really agree. And there's something related to that too that I've noticed is so before focusing on game development, I made a series on how to use RSpec. And it's like this RSpec deep dive screencast series on YouTube. And it's great because, yeah, it helped me really learn more about RSpec and feel really confident in it. But then also this thing happens where like years go by and maybe you don't use a certain gem or a certain tool and you forget about it. So I've gone back and rewatched screencasts I've made years ago because I can't remember it. And then it's like, okay, here's this 10-minute focused video that refreshes me on it. And like, I don't know, like even if it was just all just for me to help remember things, like it's worth it, right? Because it's like you learn it by teaching it and then you have this reference. you said the same thing, Seb, right? Like, I have sent my screencasts to my colleagues who maybe are struggling with a certain concept or want to learn more about some deeper RSpec things and or some deeper Ruby things like Ruby blocks or whatever. And I just it's a really efficient way to communicate concepts, I think. And that's something I really like about podcasts and video is that you can it's like feels more human, you have a voice and you can share it, and there's something I don't know, like we learn like when you go to university or school or different things, like you're generally being taught by a live person presenting, and there's just something about learning that way that seems really natural. I like that.
I will also add on top of this that you never can foresee the benefits you will get from this. So this is kind of like a effort put and the value given to the community, and you don't know how it will resonate back to you. Who will appreciate that? You mentioned that at the beginning there is a depressive kind of situation where you send the video out there and even ask about feedback and you don't get anything in exchange, like nobody fulfills your feedback form or adds a comment, right? So you don't know really that if people actually use it or see it or make it useful. But at some point from like random places you get like different kind of feedbacks that it's hard to count and monetize really. One example was that when I looked for a job, I got an interview and one of the like live coding sessions, like one of the steps were completely skipped because the company bought my Rights API course and they just went through the course quickly and said, okay, this guy knows what he's saying about, so we will not waste time for this. And that was complete surprise. So it's interesting for me because you are trying to job, right? Change your career path. So kind of like a complete new role, new tech stack, new everything. But you already are senior Ruby like web developer. You already have like a high salary in terms of like the average of all the salaries in the world, right? And changing, like rebranding yourself is comes with a lot of risk of reducing the monthly income, right? And I'm wondering, do you like take this into the consideration that the content you will put out will help you be appreciated by like a game dev company, or do you plan to build the games yourself and you are not interested in kind of like a regular job of making games for the like a corporation or something?
Yeah, there's so much there. So I'll start from the end and work backwards. So I want to make games myself. I want to be an independent creator. That's the dream, right? Is that I can have full creative control over what I make, um, and there's some interesting approaches to that I want to talk about too, that I'll get back to in a second. But so my dream is to be an independent game developer. That's it, right? And I want to be able to make my own games and release them and be supported in that journey and those efforts. And that's really hard to do. A lot of people want to do that, right?
Yes, but do you want to do everything yourself, or do you want to build a small team and delegate some work later, even for smaller games?
I think I want to do it all myself. Maybe collaborating would be interesting, and maybe particularly with music, that would be really fun to do. But I think much like a novelist goes and writes a novel by themselves, I would like to approach it like that. And I think I have the skills to I have a lot of room to grow in these skills, but I think I have the skills to produce everything that needs to go into a game. So the idea of approaching it from the perspective of like an author, right? With what I was mentioning earlier about like building an audience that's interested in what I'm making. less about, oh, here's one specific property that I made. Here's one game, and this is what I'm known for. I want to be known much like an author is known for, hopefully a variety of their works over. Like an example of this would be William Gibson. He wrote Neuromancer, and that's what he's most known for. But he's written over 10 books, and I'm just, and he's like a bit older now, and he's had this whole career where he's written and output these books, right? So when I think about the rest of my life, so I'm 30 now, if I think about when I'm 70, like William Gibson is, for 40 years, what do I want to have be produced and output over the next 40 years? That's a really scary question, right? When you're like working day to day on something, to then zoom out and think in the course of 40 years, it's really can be a lot. But when I think about that, I think, okay, I want over the course of 40 years to have released 15 games or something like that, 15 significant works. So then when I think on that time horizon, it changes the perspective of things. And then that gets into the question you asked about, how do I think about and consider finances and income and the risks there? Because I think that is a really interesting, for anyone interested in going solo, right? If you're going from a stable job where you have salary and benefits and, retirement plan, etc., to trying to make it on your own, there's a lot of risk there, and it's hard to take that risk. So the way I think about it is wanting to try to take calculated risks. And I think about what I'm doing now as planting seeds that I want to see grow over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's not like, oh, I'm trying to like quit my job this year or something like that. It's more over 5 to 10 years, right? Can I plant some seeds that grow enough to make enough income to make it viable to switch jobs? And I view this year and next year in particular as I'm not trying to, there's sort of startup costs, and I'm not expecting to make money. What I'm focusing on is like building my skills and growing the audience of people that are interested in what I'm making, and not associating a financial or any sort of expectation of finances with that work. So like with the videos I make on YouTube or the book about programming games with Ruby I wrote, or any of these things, they're always released for free and open source and easily accessible because I want to cast as wide a net as possible to find people and not necessarily worry about like converting to dollars and cents, because at the start of things, I just don't think that there's much potential for me to make money from it now. Like if I release a small game, the chances are it's not going to make much money. But if I make a free game and release it, and that reaches more people because it's freely available and accessible, like that's more valuable to me, is to be able to get myself out there rather than to start thinking in terms of revenue, business revenue. But I think in the long run, that looks like approaching it from a lot of different perspectives. So like, and in unexpected ways, like my game development and design videos could go, is like maybe there's opportunities to teach, right? Like that could be really interesting, being a like adjunct professor and being able to teach that, or creating courses and selling them online, making games and just selling them. That's an option. I set up a Patreon about a month ago, and that's actually gone pretty well. I've gotten about a dozen patrons supporting me, and that's this part of this theory and this experiment that I'm doing, which is what I said I would get back to, which is in a world where a lot of people's dream is to make games and make independent games, maybe by themselves or with a small team, it's really hard to stand out from the crowd. And it might not be apparent to people who aren't tapped into the game development community in that scene, but like every day on Steam, every week on Nintendo Switch, there are just dozens and dozens of game releases. And they're varying quality and size and scale and scope. But it's really hard to stand out from the crowd. Just like if you went and wrote a novel, right? There are so many novelists who want to make a novel. So how do you then stand out, whether you're writing a novel or making a game or whatever? And that's the question I've been asking myself a lot. And one way that my theory is that if I this is what I want to try to answer, and the answer might be it won't work out. But the question I'm posing is, can I make and release free and open source games that people like enough to support me via something like Patreon? So imagine imagine your favorite game was free and open source and you could change it and add to it or fork it and totally make your own version of it. And like if every project I do is like that and people enjoy those projects enough to support me in my future endeavors. So that's sort of the business theory or plan I have, is like making resources and content to help people who want to make games because I'm learning that stuff myself and want to help it out. And the people who want to make games are always game players, right? Because otherwise they wouldn't be pursuing this in their hobby. So then you have game players who are interested in what I'm making. Maybe they become fans of me. And then I make and release free and open source games that hopefully have a longer longevity and stand out and can reach more people, because I think there are these niche crowds of people who like use Linux and play games, or maybe have a Mac and play games. They're like these underserved audiences who, or they just believe in free software and they really want to play. They only install free software on their computer. I'm hoping that those niche audiences will be able to connect with what I'm making, and that there are ways to sort of fund and support this as like a business enterprise that aren't just like I go and spend 3 years making a game, release it, and like hope it does well, right? I can't take those risks because I have a family, right? I have obligations.
Yeah, so when you want to stand out of from the crowd, you really need to think outside of the box. You don't just need to create the better game out there. There are a lot of great games, and like if The Witcher comes out, you will get like great success maybe, but this takes years of like thousands of people being involved, right? And professionals, and like a lot of money involved in the investment. But I know that there are the most successful people are always opinionated if they are the best, but they are original in some way. So for example, if you will think about the richest or one of the richest writers in the world, novel writers, it's James Patterson, I guess, and he writes like 70 or I don't know, like crazy amount, like of books per year. I don't remember the number, so don't take me on that. But it was like dozens of books per year. And the second like most creative and efficient author produced like 13 books per day. And I was wondering how this is possible, and the answer was that he built a team of ghost writers. So he provides his creative power, he builds stories or draft of stories, and then he just curates a lot of his books, and they write under his name, under his kind of like control or so. But then he built like a whole business around that, and this was absolutely original, and his success was great, right? And there are like tons of other examples in niches, in like main markets. So I really like your approach of not focusing on just making better games, like more high quality or more in quantity games, because the even the number of and then the number of ways to monetize your hobbies is countless. You can even provide, I don't know, like in-game like options to buy something, or support you in other ways. So yeah, that is amazing. Do you want, Fede, do you want to ask about something before we go further?
No, I'm good. Sorry, I'm distracted because I had my kid got bitten by a bug, so I just got a picture in WhatsApp. So I missed the last few minutes. Oh, I'm sorry
Oh,
about that.
it's like kids. My are in separate room, completely tied together with mouth closed. So
What I would like to say is I really like the approach, and I've been tempted, sorry, of trying something of the sort, trying out either streaming or putting something out there for free and see how it goes in terms of um, not just audience reach, but in terms of audience, how do you say it, payback or feedback in terms of monetary feedback, right? Without asking for money, think how it goes, and getting a taste or getting an idea of um, how the audience responds to that. I've been tempted to do something of the sort.
awesome.
So I'll follow your story, so I see how it goes for you.
And please document your journey, because it's extremely important, and I would love to have more examples of people who just make something out of nothing with in the field that people just see. It's too hard to get out of the crowd.
And something that's interesting about that, right, is like, so I have this sort of theory, right? This sort of, here's how I'm going to approach it. That seems a little different than what might be the obvious thing to do, or like the obvious thing, or like here's what someone said when I said, oh, what if I just release everything in the public domain, right? Like, what if I just release the copyright of everything I make? I think that's kind of interesting, right? Like, imagine if like Game of Thrones, or let's just use The Witcher, because you brought up The Witcher. Imagine if the world of The Witcher had no copyright, and that you could just tell stories within it, and CD Projekt Red, the developers, could continue to tell their stories in it and make money. And people know that CD Projekt's versions of The Witcher are, high quality, huge budget, epic action RPGs. But why can't I make something in that universe? Like, why can't fan fiction be legitimized, right? To be sort of not stuck in like a gray area of copyright. And I'm really interested in that. Like, what if I make a universe and it's just in the public domain? And I think Pepper and Carrot is this comic by this French artist, David Revoy, who did that and made this successful web comic where it's a Creative Commons attribution, so you can make commercial projects based on it, and you don't need permission, you don't need lawyers, you can just make stories in that universe. And I think like empowering people to make fan works or create in that universe is the horizon. And you look at like Dungeons and Dragons, for example, and the rise of the Dungeons and Dragons podcasts and Twitch streams, and Critical Role, and what the McElroy brothers do. There's this huge resurgence in D&D, but then there runs into these issues where Wizards of the Coast, the owners of that property, want to set certain terms of how you can and can't use that IP. But if you're telling stories within a framework of Dungeons and Dragons, like, and you're bringing your own creativity to it, it just strikes me as how cool or how interesting would it be if it was just in the public domain and you could, go and do that. And so I'm really interested in doing. So anyway, so I said, what if I make my games in the public domain? And someone said, well, everyone will just steal them and publish them, right? And release them, basically theft. And the way I think about it is like, that's approaching creativity and making things and sharing them from a perspective of fear. And I think copyright exists from a place of fear. But if you instead approach that stuff with a perspective of inclusivity and permission, and allowing people to be creative with it, like, what will happen? And I'm really interested in exploring that, and not approaching these decisions about my creativity from fear, but instead approaching it from curiosity and excitement and positivity. So I'm really curious to see how that goes too. Like, maybe there are some risks. There are a couple examples of, I started a Mastodon thread where I shared some examples I found, like I said, Pepper and Carrot. There's a pretty successful indie developer named Jason Rohr. He made most recently 1 Hour, One Life, but he's made like maybe 15 plus games, and he's released them all public domain. And so you can go on his GitHub and see all the source, and you can see him making commits and updates, and people fork it and have their own versions of it. People contribute bug fixes, and but generally, I think that's like a really interesting exercise in community building and um, like supporting people doing interesting things with creativity. And I want to encourage that, not discourage it. So I'm really anytime anyone wants something done that's um, like anything that seems obvious, if there's a way to question it and go, is there another way to do it? Just why not try it?
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
That there are
Fede.
two ways. There are two ways of seeing a project, I think, or multiple ways. I want to focus into. One is I'm making this project to make money, and the other one is the one that you're proposing, where you say, or sorry, let me phrase it this way: there are two ways of validating the success project. One is how much money it makes, and the other one is how far can it grow. And that second one is um, something that I think is very interesting. I'm afraid of trying it out. I think you're trying this path out, and it's very cool you're doing it. Uh, I am afraid of doing something like that, but I like that idea of, hey, let it spread, let it reach far as it can. Money will come at some point. That's the thesis. Money
Yeah,
will come at some point, and you will be able to sustain yourself, hopefully. And I say hopefully because, far as I can see, your plan is just trying this out. There is not an actual tested out version of this that you can say, okay, yeah, this will be the perfect way to go. But yeah, it's an interesting way to put it and to try out and to follow. Yes.
I see money as a side effect of giving value to the world and to the community. And with Hanami Mastery, I also have like everything in open source. Like the source code of the blog is open source, the content is open source. Everyone can contribute, fix, add new posts, whatever. I want to highlight authors of the content, make them some recognition, like build something together, not me being the one person that builds a blog. And this is also why I started delegating like the producing video, because I want this project to not need me. I want people to, if they want, to just contribute and be a part of it. And yeah, like all of that is extremely interesting. So yeah, thanks for all of those insights.
Yeah, and there's something I wanted to speak to, which was like, has it been done before? Because, and like, can I model a sort of business off it? And how experimental is it? And I think because I have a full time job, I can be experimental, and it's like there's not much on the line, so it's more learning. But when I look at the history of games and the people that I'm fans of and interested in their work, maybe not everything they make resonates with me, but like I just think at the center of a lot of small creative projects, whether it's games or novels or music, there's one or two or three people. And with games, there's a history of freeware, and there's a history of certain developers making and releasing freeware that spreads wide and reaches some level of success. And then their next game is a paid game, and they keep making commercial releases. So there's a game called Cave Story by a guy named Daisuke Amaya, who made this game, released it in the early 2000s for Windows for free, and it just built this huge community out of it. And then eventually that game got released, re-released by a publisher, and he made a new game called Caro Blaster and some other smaller games, but like started out by making and releasing free games. And Derek Yu, the creator of Spelunky, did something similar with his games. All of his early releases freeware, and then started making more and more commercial releases. And then you look over that time horizon of 2 decades, 3 decades, and these people started with freeware and then had successful commercial games that got released. But I think it's that freeware that built that audience and that community that then allowed them to thrive and be successful. And I think so I'm taking that and sort of applying this lens of 10, 12 years as a Ruby developer, where you look at like Aaron Patterson and Mats and the sort of people who work on Ruby and Rails full time, and they're paid to do so, whether it's via government grants or GitHub employs them or whatever, right? But you have these people who, because Ruby has reached, and open source in general reaches such a wide amount of people, that they're able to seek funding one way or another via the government or commercial enterprises or whatever. And that's a little different than game programming because, a corporation that's using an open source tool to make money doesn't feel like, oh, okay, we're going to support this person making games. But I want to take that same approach, that same theory, and say, if I make my games open source as well, will people find that interesting enough to then be a part of that community or help it grow or sustain? And yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I know there are a couple examples of it, but I haven't really seen it done with such a centered around one person who's the creator or a small team of creators. It's usually like one big project. Like, I don't know how much you all know about like open source games, but there's one in particular called like Zero AD, which has been around forever, right? It's like, it's free. It's probably GPL, and the project members cycle in and out, but it like has reached, long-term success. That's sort of different because it's not a creator making it, but it's, but I want to take that, idea and see if I can make it work.
One name came to mind, and it's not on the game industry, it's in the courses industry, and that name is Wes Bos.
Yeah.
His approach, and I just realized this. His approach is he releases he sells courses, and some of his courses, sorry, are for free, and some are for pay. So, and I don't know how he chooses which will be for pay or not, but it has a similar idea or a similar approach to what we're talking about.
Let's invite him to the podcast so we can ask him about his way to decide.
Yeah, I'll take note about that because yes, I think it's a good guest to have.
Brett, I'm not sure if you are if this is correct, but isn't that Marvel with their comics also made something like that? It was not free, of course, but definitely a lot of their comics come from community, from independent kind of creators and writers and like drawers. And similar Disney for some Ducky Duck comics stories. A lot of different authors made them, and this is why there are so many different stories. But there is a problem in things like that with because at some point you lose the track of multiple people doing independently something. So Marvel came out with the concept of multiverse, and if something does not work, they just say it's on the earth, this and that. But I might like say incorrect things like in details, but the concept is kind of similar. Like those big brands also understand this concept to not get all the creativity in house, but encourage the audience and community to bring more with some filters applied, maybe some curation, maybe some content paid and under the law, and some outer check. But or branding, but still it's kind of similar to what you are saying, for me at least.
Yeah, and the same happens, I think, with another property, which is Doctor Who. They have the main story, and then there's I think there's licensing there, but there's a company called Big Finish, and they produce audiobooks, and I think they are canon, and they also produce comics and TV series and things like that are like spin-offs of Doctor Who. You have the main story, and then you have branches. I think it's something similar, but there's licensing involved there.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. Like when I know that Disney does this too with Star Wars, right? You'll have like people who are making things independently on their own, and then they pull them in, they tell a story in that universe. And I think that's really neat, right? Like that sort of, you see that happen sometimes with games too, right? Like there's like a John Wick game that was made by like a small indie developer that was pretty interesting. And yeah, you see that stuff from time to time. I like the idea of having a big property or like a big universe and being able to tell stories within it. And um, I just think it'd be cool if it was like you didn't need permission or whatever, right? Like this idea of just having stories and characters that people just out of the box have permission to do interesting things with, and commercial creations with it. I think that's just really, I don't know. Yeah, I like the idea of viewing a lot of this stuff as experiments and trying things, and not necessarily going and saying this has to make money, this has to be my full-time job, right? Because that really changes the formula of how you approach creativity. If I go and enter into something and go, this needs to make this much money in the next 6 months so I can quit my job, the decisions I would make creatively would be much different than if I go, this is an experiment for the next 2 years, and we'll see how it goes, and we'll see what I learn, and I'll share along the way, and that's sort of interesting in and of itself. And then constantly reevaluating and going, is this working? Does this still make sense? And I like, I think there's a risk going into anything that's even remotely creative, hoping to make money. Like, I think there's just like a real potential to have your dreams crushed, to go into game development, writing stories, even making screencasts, right? Like, I have screencasts on YouTube that have been up there for, going on 7 years, with tens of thousands of views. And, you'd think, oh, maybe that's making some money. But it really, like, the way that when you're making even screencasts, like in YouTube monetization, it's a little tricky, because if you're trying to make money, the content you're going to make is much different than the content you might be most interested in making, or that might be the most helpful to people. And that's something that I even have to like monitor myself with, is like, I try to make the content that I'm most interested in, that I think will be the most helpful, not the things that get the most views. And maybe that will mean I'll never reach a certain level of success, but it all depends on like what your success metrics are anyways. And if it's to like get the most views or make the most money, you'll make different decisions. But I think with this sort of experimental mindset, there's the ability to make something that, yeah, basically, how do you redefine success metrics to not just be the biggest number, whether that's money or views or whatever, and instead be like, how can I help people, or how can I approach this in a different way? And that it certainly requires an amount of privilege and resources to do that, right? And I recognize that to come from a place where I have a stable job and can then do these experiments, right? Someone might not be able to do that and take those risks or work in that way. So I definitely recognize that too. But I'm hoping that by not leading with trying to make money with all this stuff, but instead by leading with trying to help and be open and share, that will increase the longevity, it will allow me to make things that are truer to my vision, that isn't as influenced by sort of capital, and then, in the long run, hopefully sustain for those 40 years, right? Like when I'm 70 or whatever, or when I die, like with these projects being open source, like can people compile them and run them, or can people, access it as the
Oh,
platforms change? I'm really interested in the longevity.
this is amazing, but I unfortunately need to say that we are heading up to the end of our time frame. I definitely feel like we need a follow-up discussion on all of that, because it took completely different direction even than we planned. But for people who would like to follow you already and support you already on your journey, how they can find you?
Yeah, the best place is my website, brettchalupa.com, BRETTCHALUPA.com. That's kind of the central hub to everything. From there, you'll find links out to my newsletter, which is like you know, pretty much just the good stuff. I'm on Mastodon, which you'll find on my website too. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/@ Brett Makes Games. And so I'm Brett Makes Games on YouTube. And then if you are a Rubyist and you want to watch my old Ruby screencasts, that's Brett Codes on YouTube. And you can check that out. And just appreciate this conversation. It was so great, Seb and Feta. It was really awesome to explore these ideas. And I'm definitely going to share how it goes, and would love to come back and report on what I learn and how this all goes.
Yes, please do,
Definitely,
because
let's connect on.
it's been a very nice podcast. We've gone very long, and to be honest, I don't want it to finish. But yeah, so we're on time. So yeah, we really sorry. We really need a follow up for this.
We will link all the resources in the description, in the show notes. So make sure you check it out. Let's connect on Discord for sure. And yeah, it was amazing. It was a blast to talk to you and get to know you. So I am so excited that I have another person so exciting and positive in my network. Amazing. So thanks for joining. Thanks, Fede, for being here. Thanks all of our listeners, and see you in the next episode.
See you.
Thanks, y'all. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.